adaptation model, and perhaps like a little bit about how it applies to this um, case study that we got.
Yeah, so the first of those three adaptive systems that I was thinking about was the regulator, which is kind of talking about his coping mechanisms and kind of internal chemical and endocrine responses. And I think these are pretty relevant to his situation because he has a diagnosis of anxiety. And he, in his scenario, it said that he usually manages this with medications and therapy, but he's considering moving to a new place, to Chicago. So I know that this could add a lot of extra stress and could kind of change how his normal regulation works.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think that like kind of ties directly into like the cognitive role, which involves like cognitive and emotional processes that interact like with the environment. So obviously he's going to be changing the entirety of his external environment as he moves to a new location. And so, a lot of that will influence, the decisions that he makes and how his both like emotional and physiological responses um, to the impact of like his diabetes and stuff like that. So I feel like those kind of tie in directly with each other. And he uses like the perceptions that he sees to make his decisions going forward.
Absolutely. And again, in the same sort of realm, it's important to have stabilizing factors like structures and routines and things like that that can just help keep you neutral and make sure that you're headed in the right direction. So I definitely think in his case, some stabilizing factors like that are his um, music, his piano, which he finds very therapeutic, and it's a really good like daily practice for him. And again, his therapy and SSRI medications really help him stay level and neutral.
Yeah. And then like going forward, I think like even though he's not quite there yet, like the innovator will be very important because that's like where he's gonna like learn those new practices and his new like behavior changes to be able to like manage his diabetes as he does move on to a new environment.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as his care team, it's really important for us to make sure that he is responding well to that new environment and continuing to grow and manage his health well, especially because, it's a lot of new independence he's taking on. It can be a tough challenge.
Yeah, so those were like the individual adaptations. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about like the different adaptive modes that direct responses to like environmental stimuli?
I can talk about the physiological mode. So that kind of refers to how well, as in the title, his physiological state of his body and how that's responding. So with anxiety, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it can increase stress levels, like cortisol hormones, which can do a lot of things in the body, like increasing blood sugar or disturbing someone's sleep patterns and things like that, which can be really hard for a student. And again, with his diabetes, if it's unmanaged, he can have really high or really low blood sugars, which in the short term can be really terrible, could land him in the hospital or even result in death if they're not caught. And long term can result in things like issues with nerve damage or kidney damage and things like that. So it's really important that make sure he's keeping on top of that and keeping them in check. Did anyone want to talk about the self concept mode?
I can. So basically, the self concept mode is just behavior that's related to the personal aspects of the individual. So, kind of like his own personal identity and then his own like personal beliefs. So, like in his case, like identifying as a male and whether he might identify as like spiritual, non spiritual, and just other things that he identifies as being important to him in his life.
Yeah, and I think that ties in similarly to like the role function mode because like the role function mode is like how he identifies himself within the society. So like as he moves on to school, he identifies himself as a musician, as a student, perhaps it's someone with diabetes, and it like focuses his role onto like where he should be in society, and will kind of guide his responses to the environmental stimuli and how he like deals with his management of diabetes.
And I think his role as an interdependent person is also important because his friends and connections that he makes while at school, as well as his parents and his grandmother back at home, are going to be really important in his ability to find stability and just continue living a healthy and fulfilling life while he's at school.
Yeah, and then
I
I think like,
also thought
go ahead.
I was also thinking about how his outside environment might impact him along this transition. Just different kinds of outdoor stimuli, mainly a focal stimulus, which is kind of what immediately confronts an individual and holds their attention. So, it can be really hard to focus on something like remembering to check your blood sugar every few hours when you're maybe in class or on the phone, or, whatever thing is distracting him at that time.
Yeah, and then I think like as his care team, it'd be like super important to touch on like contextual and residual stimuli, because like those may be some things that perhaps he's not considering, but that will be important to consider once he is on his own, caring for himself when he's at school.
Definitely. Next thing I wanted to talk about were some of Roy's concepts that might help us as his care team prepare him before he starts to go, and just some important questions that we might want to start asking him to kind of get a better idea of where he's at. Did you guys have any ideas for that?
Well, I know for the physiological mode, some of the questions the RN case manager might ask are kind of about like his nutrition, his plans for activity and rest as he goes to college, and how like he really is planning on like maintaining his health and safety once he goes into a new environment. So she might kind of ask about like the college cafeteria situation. So like, will you be eating at the college cafeteria, or will you be like cooking yourself, and kind of assessing how he'll manage his blood sugar? And then asking, do you plan on using the gym or joining any clubs to assess like his activity level while at college? And then kind of like asking, what routine do you think would work for you to monitor your blood sugar levels? Just kind of seeing like, does he have a plan of doing it every time before he goes to the cafeteria, or what that kind of like schedule would look like for him.
I definitely
Yeah.
think that's important, especially as a younger student that might attract a lot of attention, or bring up some questions or discomfort socially that we should be able to prepare him to handle.
Yeah, and then I don't recall if you mentioned it, Tara, but I think it'd be important to ask about like support systems and like how he views himself within the school too, to like see if he has natural resources that can help him once he gets to his new environment.
Another thing I talked about or like thought about was letting other people know like on his when he goes to college, like his roommate or his RA, about his like type 1 diabetes, so that people are like aware of his condition and like kind of know what to do, and then he can like reach out to them for help as well.
I definitely think it's important that we talk to him, or maybe even help him reach out to the people he's going to be around before he moves in. Even like Tara talked about the cafeteria, we could reach out to the cafeteria and talk about what kind of foods they offer, and what kind of information or services they have available to help someone with diabetes maintain like a good eating habits and good health.
I also think, going off what Alistair said, just kind of like using the interdependence mode to kind of like assess where he is at that, like going adapting to a new environment. So kind of like also asking like, who do you call when you have like a problem, and just like identifying that like main support person that he has, and just letting him know that like when you do experience stress, like what steps are you gonna take to get on top of that. And then just kind of asking him his plan for like creating new friendships and then maintaining his like relationships at home and like what that will look like for him, just so to like kind of illustrate to him his support system and to make sure that he doesn't feel like he needs to adapt to this new situation alone.
Definitely. I think like a lot of the things we've talked about were super broad, so I think it might help if we could kind of form some more concrete goals for him that might be easier for him to like write down and think about and keep track of.
Some short-term goals that I thought would be helpful for Nate would be improving his knowledge of type 1 diabetes and how foods and exercise and stress can affect how that. Also, I thought about another goal of like integrating mobile technology so that he can track his serum blood glucose monitoring so that he's able to kind of watch that at all times. That too, like he could share that information with his mother or his grandmother so that they can kind of watch it as well. And then a last short-term goal I thought of was just establishing care with a physician in Chicago for management of his diabetes, and then a therapist for mental health. So maybe that's like reaching out to services that are offered on campus.
Yeah, I think those are all really good ideas because, like as cited in like in the textbook in the Senesek and Roy 2020 text, it hits all the main like factors of the personal adaptation. So it hits like the individual, it hits interpersonal, it hits like all four of those with the plan that you got for short term, and then we can use those same plans kind of to develop like a long-term plan. So what do you guys think some long-term plans might be, or long-term goals?
One of them I thought, which was also talked about in the short term, was just maintaining those acceptable blood glucose levels within like a good range. We don't want it to be too low, too high, or just all over the place. So having a long-term goal of knowing his acceptable ranges would definitely be a good goal.
I think another one, just to add to that a little bit, would be just to like make him feel more assured and more confident in his ability to manage his own care by himself away from home and just feel comfortable in that transition.
I think also just like him getting to like know his own body and like what works best for him. So just like the big overarching theme of like managing his own illness and like creating kind of like a routine and schedule of like what that looks like for him.
Yeah, so I think those are all like good preventative stuff that we talked about. What are some things that you think might be able to help? Like if we were to develop like a stressor action plan to like environmental stimuli, what do you think are some things that can help him deal with that? Like focusing on Senesac and Roy 2020, like the difference between focal, contextual, and residual stimuli. How do you think he might be able to deal with those?
Well, of course, it would depend on the stimuli, but I think some strategies that he could use are ones that he's learned from his therapist, or he could practice engaging with his regulating factors, like practicing piano, or maybe hanging out with friends, or like Tara mentioned, reaching out to a support system like his grandmother or his mother. Might help him work through, additional stress, which is just unavoidable.
I think also like a good point is to like kind of have him identify like kind of a schedule, like not like a set schedule, but just kind of like a rough thing of like what he's going to do when he's stressed, like what activity he might do, like what nutrition he plans on eating. Just because like being around like peers, doing like a social activity or like just going to the gym or doing things like that can also be a part of his like stress action plan just in taking care of himself.
I definitely agree with that. I also think it's important that we make sure that he's reaching these goals with more concrete measurements so that we can make sure that they're really happening and they don't just kind of get lost in his, in his head and his busy life and whatnot. And I think some good ways that we could monitor this progress would be to keep in contact with his new doctor in Chicago for labs such as his A1C, or keep track of any additional hospitalizations or urgent care visits or things like that if his blood sugar does need to be treated in a more acute setting, just so we can keep track of how often that's happening and if it's getting better or not.
Yeah, and I think that'd be like a perfect opportunity for like a community-based nurse case manager to step in and follow up with him to see if he's like going to those appointments so that we can ensure that he's getting that like hemoglobin A1C level, make sure that he's not becoming hypoglycemic or super hyperglycemic, and just maintaining that constant support system with him as he moves to his new environment.
As the semester progresses, how we know that Nate is like having his plan be successful, we kind of just thought about how he is going to be remaining in good health with no complications. So like Maya said, additional hospitalizations, you want to avoid those. If he's managing his anxiety well, and just able to get those assignments in on time, his grades are good, he's maintaining good grades, he's going to class, his anxiety is not like affecting that at all. He also, as we all kind of said, just built a strong support system, whether that's college friends or relying on his mother and grandmother still, even with that distance. And then just another, like how we can see if how he will know that his plan is successful is just that he's established those self-care activities to his daily life to help manage his health. So he has a good routine of going to the gym, studying, eating a good diet, making sure he has time for himself and his friends. I think that just by all of those things, like he will know that his plan is successful and will continue to be successful.
Well, great talk, guys. I think we've got a great care plan for Roy.